Carl Jung discovered something so disturbing about human consciousness in 1913 that he nearly lost his sanity trying to understand it. While treating patients at his Zurich clinic, he realized that the lies people tell themselves aren't just minor distortions of reality. They are systematic destructions of the self, so deeply embedded in the psyche that most people die without ever recognizing them. And here's what terrified him most. The people who believed they were being most honest with themselves were often trapped in the deepest levels of self-deception. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever caught yourself believing something about who you are, only to realize later it was completely false? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Your awareness is about to shift permanently. Jung called this phenomenon the shadow's greatest trick. Not simply lying to others, but creating an entire false architecture of self-perception so convincing that you would defend it with your life. Some people spend decades in therapy without ever piercing this veil. Others destroy their relationships, careers, and inner peace protecting lies they don't even know they're telling. The 3 lies I'm about to reveal aren't just psychological quirks. They are, according to Jung's clinical observations, the primary mechanisms through which human beings fragment themselves into neurosis, depression, and what he termed a life unlived. In the spring of 1932, a 37-year-old professor arrived at Jung's practice in Küsnacht. Let's call him Heinrich. On the surface, Heinrich appeared to be the model of psychological health, successful, articulate, with a reputation for brutal honesty in his academic work. He came to Jung not because he felt troubled, but because his wife had left him, and he genuinely could not understand why. During their first session, Heinrich described himself as transparently authentic. He prided himself on never hiding his true thoughts. He believed he lived without pretense, that he had integrated his darker impulses years ago through rigorous self-examination. As Jung later wrote in his clinical notes, the patient presented with absolute conviction in his self-knowledge, which was itself the clearest symptom of his disorder. Over 12 weeks, Jung documented what he called a textbook case of triadic self-deception. Heinrich told himself 3 fundamental lies, and each one had constructed an entire false personality around it. The first lie, I am who I think I am. The second, my motives are pure and conscious. The third, I am already authentic. These weren't simply errors in judgment. They were, as Jung wrote in 1934, the 3 pillars upon which the false self builds its temple, each one appearing as truth while concealing the opposite. But Jung discovered something even more chilling. When he confronted Heinrich with evidence of these self-deceptions, the patient's psychological defenses became so severe that he experienced what Jung termed ego death anxiety. The lies weren't just beliefs, they were the structure of Heinrich's identity itself. Let me break down what Jung discovered about these 3 lies, because understanding them intellectually is the first step toward recognizing them in your own psyche. The first lie is what Jung called the persona delusion. This is the belief that your conscious self-concept, the story you tell yourself about who you are, represents your true identity. Jung wrote, "The persona is that which one is not, but which one's self as well as others think one is." You construct a personality based on societal expectations, early childhood conditioning, and selective memories, then mistake this construction for your authentic self. Type 1 is the inflated persona. These individuals believe they are more virtuous, intelligent, or spiritually evolved than they actually are. Jung observed in his 1934 lecture, "The ego inflates itself with borrowed plumes and believes them to be its own." A real-world example, the person who prides themselves on being brutally honest but is actually just cruel, mistaking their aggression for authenticity. Type 2 is the deflated persona. Here, the self-concept is built on inadequacy and shame. Jung noted, some people shrink from their own greatness, finding it safer to live in the basement of their potential. You tell yourself you're incapable, broken, or fundamentally flawed, and this becomes a comfortable prison that excuses you from the terror of actualizing your potential. Type 3 is the fragmented persona. This is the person who has multiple contradictory self-concepts that never integrate. At work, you're the ambitious professional. At home, you're the selfless caregiver. Neither version knows the other exists. Jung warned, the psyche split against itself cannot stand. The second lie is, my motives are pure. Jung discovered that humans possess an extraordinary ability to disguise selfish, fearful, or destructive impulses as noble intentions. He called this moral self-deception and considered it more dangerous than the first lie because it operates entirely beneath conscious awareness. Phase 1 of this deception is what Jung termed rationalization. You take an action driven by fear, ego, or desire, then construct an elaborate intellectual justification afterward. Jung wrote in his clinical notes, "The mind becomes a lawyer for the shadow, defending indefensible acts with brilliant arguments." For example, you sabotage a colleague's project not out of jealousy, but because you're protecting the company's standards. Phase 2 is projection. This is the shadow's most insidious weapon. The qualities you refuse to acknowledge in yourself, you see everywhere in others. Jung observed, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward. You call someone manipulative while failing to see your own manipulation. You judge others for their materialism while your entire self-worth depends on external validation. Phase 3 is what Jung called moral inflation. Here, you don't just hide your darker motives, you actually believe you transcended them entirely. Jung warned in 1937, nothing is more dangerous than the person who believes they have conquered their shadow. You see this in spiritual communities where practitioners develop a subtle arrogance, convinced that their meditation practice has eliminated their ego, when in fact, it has simply given their ego a spiritual mask. The third lie is perhaps the most sophisticated: I am already authentic. This is the belief that you've done the work, that you've achieved self-knowledge, and that you now live in alignment with your true nature. Jung considered this the ultimate trap because it closes the door to further growth. Danger. 1 is premature integration. This is when you mistake intellectual understanding for actual psychological transformation. Jung wrote, knowing about the shadow is not the same as integrating it. The difference is the distance between reading about swimming and jumping into the ocean. You've read the books, you use the language, you can explain Jungian concepts brilliantly, but your actual behavior remains unchanged. Danger 2 is the authenticity paradox. The harder you try to be authentic, the more you construct a false self built around the idea of authenticity. Jung observed that patients who were most obsessed with finding themselves were often running from themselves. True authenticity, he argued, isn't achieved through effort, but through surrender to what already is. Danger 3 is the fixed identity trap. You've decided who you are, what your values are, what you believe. This solidified identity feels like authenticity, but it's actually the opposite. Jung warned, the psyche is not a fixed entity, but a living, evolving process. To freeze it into a single identity is to kill it. Real authenticity requires remaining open to the uncomfortable truth that you don't fully know yourself, and that who you are is constantly changing. So how did Jung propose we escape these 3 lies? He developed what he called the integration process, broken into distinct phases that patient Heinrich eventually underwent. Phase 1 is brutal self-observation. Jung instructed patients to watch themselves as if they were strangers. Notice when you justify your actions. Notice when you feel defensive. Notice when you congratulate yourself for being self-aware. He wrote, the first step is to stop trusting your own self-assessment entirely. The practice for 1 week, write down every time you explain your behavior to yourself. Most people are shocked to discover how constant their self-justification is. Phase 2 is shadow confrontation. This means actively seeking the qualities in yourself that you most despise in others. If you hate arrogance, find the arrogance in yourself. If you judge people for being fake, locate your own inauthenticity. Jung's method was direct. Make a list of people you dislike. Their qualities are your disowned shadow. Phase 3 is surrender of the false self. This is where most people fail. It requires allowing your carefully constructed identity to dissolve without knowing what will replace it. Jung called this voluntary ego death and warned it feels like psychological annihilation, but he insisted only through the destruction of the false self can the true self emerge. Phase 4 is ongoing humility. Even after integration work, the capacity for self-deception never fully disappears. Jung maintained his own practice of what he called confrontation with the unconscious throughout his life. The manifestation of successful integration isn't certainty about who you are, but comfort with uncertainty. You stop defending a fixed self-concept and become fluid, adaptive, authentic, not through effort, but through relaxation of ego control. Let me give you 2 historical examples that illustrate these principles in action. Example: 1 is a cautionary tale. Jung documented a patient from 1935 who refused to acknowledge his self-deception. This man, a prominent physician, believed himself to be a devoted healer motivated purely by compassion. Through analysis, Jung uncovered that his medical practice was actually driven by a need for power and admiration. When confronted with this shadow material, the physician terminated therapy and doubled down on his persona. Within 2 years, he had developed severe psychosomatic symptoms and eventually suffered a complete breakdown. Jung wrote, "The shadow denied becomes the demon that destroys us." Example 2 shows the opposite trajectory. A woman in her early 40s came to Jung in 1933, deeply depressed but unable to identify why. Through analysis, she discovered all 3 lies operating simultaneously. Her entire identity was built on being the selfless mother. Her motives were disguised control masked as care, and she believed she had already achieved authentic living. The integration process was painful. She had to acknowledge her resentment toward her children, her manipulation of her husband, and the falseness of her entire self-concept. But Jung noted in his follow-up, 6 months after integration work, she reported feeling alive for the first time in decades. Jung's own journey with these 3 lies is perhaps the most compelling. Between 1913 and 1917, after his break with Freud, Jung experienced what he called my confrontation with the unconscious. He realized that his entire professional identity, his rational scientific persona, was a lie that protected him from the chaos of his inner world. He wrote in his private journals, "I had been teaching patients to integrate their shadows while my own shadow remained unexplored." For 3 years, Jung deliberately engaged with his unconscious through what he called active imagination, a process he documented in The Red Book. He encountered terrifying visions, dialogues with autonomous inner figures, and the complete dissolution of his identity. He later wrote, "I was voluntarily submitting myself to emotions of which I could not approve, and I was writing down fantasies which often struck me as nonsense." But this confrontation with his own self-deception became the foundation for his entire psychological system. What Jung learned was that his motive for becoming a psychiatrist wasn't purely to help others, as he had believed. It was also to understand his own psychological chaos. His self-concept as a rational scientist was a defense against the mystical, irrational dimensions of his psyche. And his belief that he was authentic was the very thing preventing actual authenticity. He concluded, "I could not expect of my patients something I did not dare to do myself." Now let me take you back to Heinrich, the professor from after 6 months of intensive analysis. Something shifted. Heinrich stopped defending his self-concept. He acknowledged the arrogance beneath his honesty. He recognized that his intellectual brilliance was often weaponized cruelty. He admitted that his claim to authenticity was itself a sophisticated form of self-deception. Jung's final notes on the case describe a transformed man, not perfect, not enlightened, but awake. Heinrich's relationships improved not because he became kinder, but because he became real. His depression lifted not because he fixed his problems, but because he stopped lying about having no problems. His sense of fragmentation dissolved not because he integrated all his parts, but because he stopped pretending he was already whole. Jung wrote in his summary, "The patient no longer claims to know himself. This not knowing is his greatest achievement. Here's what I need you to understand. Your self-deception isn't a bug in your psychological system, it's a feature. It developed to protect you when you were young and vulnerable. The persona you constructed kept you safe. The lies you told yourself about your motives protected you from overwhelming guilt or shame. Your claim to authenticity gave you a stable sense of self in a chaotic world. But what protected you then is now your prison. Your false self-concept isn't who you are, it's who you had to become to survive." The question Jung would ask you is this: are you ready to stop surviving and start living? The 3 lies you tell yourself, "I am who I think I am, my motives are pure, and I am already authentic," are not personal failings, they are the human condition. Every person watching this right now is trapped in some version of these deceptions. The difference between a life of quiet desperation and a life of genuine depth is not the absence of self-deception, it's the willingness to confront it. If this resonated with you, if you felt that uncomfortable recognition that Jung called the shadow speaking, then subscribe to this channel. We're exploring the deepest territories of the human psyche, the places most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Your willingness to look into this darkness is not morbid. It's the most courageous thing you can do. Remember what Jung discovered in his own confrontation with the unconscious. The lies you tell yourself aren't making you weak. They're fragments of a self that's trying to become whole. And the path to that wholeness doesn't run around your self-deception.